Hey everyone, this is Josh Peak. I'm the host of the Josh Peak Show, and in this episode I interview Chance Leonard. Chance is a good friend of mine, successful businessman, comes from the wrestling world, and has done a lot for the state of Oklahoma when it comes to wrestling. You're really going to enjoy this interview. You really get to see how his success in wrestling parlayed over into business, and a lot of the same things that it takes to be successful in wrestling, it parallels right into business. And so I know you're really going to enjoy this interview. I got a lot out of it, not only hosting it, but just being a listener as I'm asking the questions. And you can see the internal burning desire that he's got, that he possesses to be a successful businessman. And so great family man. And I think you're really going to enjoy this show. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to the Josh Peak Show. I got a good friend with me here, Chance Leonard, and we interview entrepreneurs, and one thing I try to do is interview entrepreneurs that have been in the wrestling world, and so Chance and I have got to know each other over the last couple of years here, and the work that he's done with the Oklahoma Regional Training Center and with the University of Oklahoma. So Chance, I'm glad you're on, and I appreciate you coming on with me here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Josh. It's great to speak with you, and hope you're doing well.
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. So how are you enjoying Florida right now?
The weather has been fantastic. I can't say that it's comparable to Oklahoma because it definitely stands out. But, to get into the wrestling world down here, it's not nearly the type of priority that it is in Oklahoma. So it's an interesting dynamic to watch, and hopefully may be able to have some influence and impact on the wrestling world here in Florida.
Well, that'd be good. There's some good wrestlers coming out of Florida, it looks like. And obviously we talked about there's some good jiu-jitsu, and
there is.
Yeah, some Brazilians that have made their mark in Florida. But so let's go ahead and get started. So you grew up in Perry, Oklahoma, and you and your brother and your family, and so talk about that a little bit and kind of how you got started in wrestling.
Yeah, you bet. Growing up in Perry, Oklahoma was a privilege. I didn't really realize it at the time, as you can imagine. Growing up in a town of 5,000 people, it's really small. There's not much to do, but the benefit of that is that it created focus. And so I grew up on a Centennial Ranch, and the land in our family's been there for over 120 years now, I believe. I think it's 126, if I remember correctly. And so, I really learned at an early age what work ethic and commitment were all about. And to be able to transfer that work ethic over into my chosen sport of wrestling only, helped prepare what, success that I had, because, work ethic and wrestling go hand in hand, as we both know. And I really do look back on that time with excitement for what's to come, and what it helped build in me, and what it forged in me as a person, to be able to transfer that and use that in my professional career now, outside the sport of wrestling.
That's cool. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, so obviously there's such a pedigree. It's almost like, in Perry, if you don't win a state championship, or even if you do win a state championship, it's just another trophy almost. It's almost expected, right?
It definitely is expected, but it's sure not taken for granted. And I think that's one thing that leads to the continued success of the program. It's one of the winningest high school wrestling programs in the country. And it has a national record 43 state high school wrestling championships out of its 97-year history. And since 1961, the program has never gone more than 2 years without winning a state title. So if you wrestle all 4 years of high school, you'll win at least 2 state championships as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so to win it individually, is very unique. Obviously, I think everybody strives to win a state championship, at least one, if not, to try to get to 4. Believe it or not, when I was growing up, if I date myself here a little bit, there were only 3 4-time state champions at that time: Leonard Shelton, Cecil Beisel, and Kenny Monday.
Wow.
And so I graduated the same year as Todd Chesbrough, who was a 4-time state champion, and Kyle Roseborough, who became a 4-time state champion. Wrestled with me a year at the University of Oklahoma before he moved on. And then Todd went on and was obviously successful at Oklahoma State. And so that year, Keith Nix was actually knocked off in the finals by Mike Bodley, who he and I were on the same team that wrestled in Europe that preceding summer. So the competition was still as tough then as it is now. And it's unique to see how many state championships continue to be won in Perry, Oklahoma. But, Josh, I think it really boils down to the program truly being committed in a way that is humble and doesn't take any of the state championships or the past success for granted. And, the community support is tremendous. I spoke to Dan Hodge last night. Yesterday was his birthday. He turned 87, and he still talks about growing up in Perry, Oklahoma. He's lived there all of his life. Despite all the success that he's had, he could have lived anywhere. He's still talking about the Perry Wrestling program.
He's a legend. He's definitely a legend. It's a small world because Danny Hodge is good friends with my first business mentor, Cowboy Bill Watts, who had a pro wrestling company and then went to the University of Oklahoma as well. Big University of Oklahoma fan, obviously. And I get his emails all the time about Oklahoma football. So it's a small world. The wrestling world is a small world. And Ronnie Doakes did a good job over there. I mean, I went to high school with him. He was a little bit younger than me, but he seems to be doing a pretty good job over at Perry. But so you went to University of Oklahoma after graduation, right?
I did. I went to the Air Force Academy my first year, almost the entire first year. But and then I wanted to be an athlete in college and wanted to wrestle, and came back to the University of Oklahoma.
Awesome. So let's talk about family a little bit. Then you and Joe, how long have you guys been married then?
It's 15 years, actually.
So did you guys meet
15 years. Did you guys
meet at the University of Oklahoma then?
No, I'm actually quite a bit older.
Okay.
So, we actually met in Dallas in 2004. And so we had both been out of college since 1992. And we met there, and I had moved to Texas from Missouri, and she had moved to Texas from Florida.
Okay, cool. And so then you guys have 2 boys.
Have 2 boys, yep, Luke and Ethan.
Yep.
Very blessed to have them. We're both carrying on and doing, taking part in the sport of wrestling now. And, the goal with them is to give them an opportunity to compete, but most importantly, to have a way that they can learn these valuable character traits that are the part of the process, of that forging process that wrestling teaches. And so we hope that they are able to gain that from just participating in the sport.
Yeah, I know it definitely teaches the best qualities. So then parlaying wrestling into entrepreneurship. I mean, you've had quite a bit of success, obviously. And so how did it parlay from wrestling? Then you obviously go right into, talk to me about how you got started as a businessman, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I was very fortunate, or unfortunate in some ways, to have come in contact with a lot of orthopedic surgeons during my wrestling career. I actually fractured a bone in my spine when I was 15 years old, and caused me to miss the state tournament my freshman year in high school. But through that and subsequent 4 spine surgeries afterwards, I really got to know a lot of orthopedic and neurologic surgeons around the U.S., and I started to work with a company. They suggested to me, actually, when I was in college, that I should look into a small company called Synthes at the time. And it was an orthopedic trauma company. And from a personality standpoint, it was an exact match for me. Medical device sales is very, very competitive. You have to be an expert at what you do. You have to be what I have learned to be the 4 A's of my persona, and that is being available, being affable, being accountable, and being attentive to details. If you do those 4 things well, and no matter what you do, I think you'll always be successful. But those 4 things carried me in the sport, in my professional career, because medical device sales was a lot like wrestling in many ways. The 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on call is a grind, and wrestling is a grind. The sport of wrestling teaches you humility. When any given day, you can be beaten by anybody. And, there were days in my professional career that, I lost to the competition on one day or another. But the most important thing about it was just the responsibility and really transitioning that a step further into accountability. There's a lot of people in this world now that don't want to be responsible for anything, and it's always going to be somebody else's fault. And we know the great thing that the sport of wrestling teaches you is that when you're one-on-one out in the middle of the mat, there's nobody else to blame. And you've got to step, and toe the line and take responsibility. You get to do that if you win, and you get to do that if you lose. But if you can transition that further into accountability, and be able to utilize that and harness it, you really do set yourself apart. And lastly, attention to detail. I've learned a tremendous amount of wrestling moves over the years, but I've also learned a tremendous amount of product and clinical knowledge as it relates to the human body and surgery, and how that developed into a career. And in my career, I've been in probably 30,000 plus orthopedic trauma surgeries. And that required and necessitated me to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There were times when my wife and I were dating, we never drove the same car anywhere, because I would always get called out. And so, but I think really, Josh, it boils back down to those character traits, and learning to utilize what I learned in wrestling and applying it to the business world.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And it's amazing how many people that I meet that I know in the wrestling world, and I've also met, that have went into medical sales, or medical device sales, or they are involved somewhat in kind of the same industry that you're involved in. And it's amazing. I mean, it's here in Oklahoma. Obviously there's a lot of folks that were wrestlers and that are now in the medical space and doing well. There
are.
Yeah.
The reason why, I'll tell you, as now, being in the executive leadership side of my organization, we know what to look for, right? It's the character traits, the intangible qualities that set people apart. I always get asked, who do I like to hire? And, I'll tell people, don't bring me your resume. Your resume is an opportunity to show the things that you've accomplished in the past, but guess what? It's all the past. The hunger is really important. The character is really, really important. The work ethic. You can't teach people to get out of bed. Mm-hmm. You can't teach people to be on time. It has to be expected, and people have to have learned to be molded into it. And these companies out there, they've identified these quality and character traits that are important and lead to success, and they hire that first. That's always what I look for, is those intangible qualities, because they correlate and lead directly to future success.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is true. I mean, I mean, there's no question. To be an entrepreneur, you have to have a burning desire and be self-motivated. And I think same thing in wrestling as well. And I've asked that question to a lot of my friends that are business owners, and that's what I was getting ready to ask you. That overall, as a wrestler, do most, I know not all, obviously, but do most wrestlers are they a good fit as either an entrepreneur or at least as an employee? Do you look for wrestlers?
I do. Now, I think there's other sports and stuff that certainly can mimic the same sort of traits. Mm-hmm. I think that background is important, but I think the separation is really created by the fact that wrestling is a one-on-one sport, and you have to take responsibility in order, to win. I think there's been a quote that circulates around now that, don't be upset about the results that you didn't get because of the lack of work that you put in.
Sure.
And, wrestling is something that cannot be duplicated by any other sport because of not only the work ethic that you have to put in, but you have the discipline of limiting the amount of water intake and food intake in order to make weight. And that creates a separate class. There's only so many people that fall into the elite category. There's only so many of the people that fall into great, and there's only so many that fall into good. And a lot of those things are created by doing the right things right for an extended period of time. You think about guys like Jordan Burroughs, who continues to be successful at the international level. And I think that he continues to reproduce those quality traits. And I think if kids will look to that as an example and do those things, they'll be successful. But I think the last part about it too, Josh, is really hunger is so important. Mm-hmm. You cannot ever stop wanting to accomplish something, mainly because you have the opportunity to do it. When you have an opportunity, if you don't capitalize on it, somebody else will. And so you got to be hungry and recognize that's extremely important.
Well, that brings up, it just pops in my mind. I mean, so society where we're at today, it's almost like we have the polar opposites it's almost like becoming more and more divided, where you hear so many people talking about the millennial group, the millennial class, whatever, generation. And, how they're always on their games, or they expect instant results or whatever. And I try not to buy into that, because I see some millennials that are wrestling that have been extremely successful. But as a whole, and I'm not just talking about millennials, but as a whole, where society is, do you think we're getting softer? Or do you think that, or maybe it's I guess in the competitive sense, maybe the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer when it comes to results, coming down to hard work. I mean, yeah,
I personally believe that it is a bit of an epidemic, because I think there is lack of focus. When I go back to my upbringing, obviously we didn't have the devices that they came out with, an Atari at that point in time, but I never knew what was missing, because I was always finding something new to do, whether I was, having to work on my ranch or having to truly, exert myself in the sport of wrestling. And I think if kids would take themselves out of that environment and put themselves into an environment to be able to look to accomplish something besides doing it, on a phone or a video game, then they'll be able to apply themselves and be able to achieve goals. And I get worried that the kids don't set goals for themselves anymore. And obviously in the sport of wrestling, you gotta set a goal even just to make weight. Yeah. And I think it really does teach you a lot of things that other sports are not going to, and they got to do it fast. Right.
Well, so the last question I have, speaking of that, I know you're really involved in the regional training center at Oklahoma, and so I guess a couple parts to that is, do you see that creating it is creating an interesting environment, the regional training center, the regional training centers all across America, whether not just Oklahoma, but across the country. I mean, I personally think it's a good thing what the regional training centers are doing. I think it's going to create a better. I think we're already starting to see it, like the results of. I mean, America, we're doing good. I mean, we have that.
I mean, there's no doubt that the brilliance of the regional training center is astounding. You know, we've seen the results and the output of putting a strategic plan in place and allowing it, you know, to come to fruition. And so, you know, I think one of the things that I love most about the regional training center is that it exposes the younger generation who have aspirations, obviously student athletes at the collegiate levels, to be able to understand what next level training is about, what next level goal setting is about, what next level competition is all about. And so that, you know, you never, ever stop understanding that you have a lot to learn, you need to be humble, and there's always somebody better that's waiting to take your place. And so what it does with our collegiate programs and our younger kids is allows them to have a vision of the future, but having the ability to be coached by some of the same great coaches that participated at the Olympic and international level on a daily basis with them when they're 10 years old, 11 years old. I mean, I had Jack Van Bever that would come by every once in a while. He was getting later, you know, in age when I was graduating and going through high school. But, you know, Danny Hodge would be around, but never had close proximity to have an Olympian training in the same room with you. Mm-hmm. And one thing that we've done that under the guidance and leadership of Eric Guerrero, our head coach at the Oklahoma RTC, and Lou Rosselli, is that we've also, you know, looked to ensure that we bring in the youth so that they see up close and personal what it's all about and set their goals high. That's one thing we talked a little bit about earlier is, you know, having kids set goals. When they see their heroes, people they have an opportunity to sit by after practice and sweating with, you know, and lifting some extra weights and watching them do things in order to win gold and do it full time, you know, you can't replace that. You can't. And so all of these programs around the country see the value of it and the intimacy and relationship that's created through it. And hence, that's why we are going to have the possibility of having 2-3 world champions not make our Olympic team. You know, certainly the lack of weights are an influence on that, but somebody's not going to make it on the ladder. And to be a world champion and not be able to make the Olympic team is something that we've never had, you know, really in the past.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially that 65 kilo weight, that is stacked. I mean,
oh my gosh,
that is a stacked weight. You know, we got some good wrestlers. I mean, some Oklahoma ties to that weight. Also, I think 57 as well. So, yeah, no, I mean, there's no question the results that I think we're reaping some good results as a country based on the regional training centers all across the country. Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. And that's how I met you, obviously, is through the regional training center.
Yeah.
But, I think it's great. I think it's great for the state of Oklahoma, and you know, and I just think it's going to continue to get better. So the last thing is, so what are you doing these days? I mean, you moved from Oklahoma to Florida. What's your focus on these days?
I am actually, as I said a little bit earlier, in the executive leadership side of a company. I serve as senior vice president of an organization that focuses on upper extremity trauma. Mm-hmm. And, you know, another example, I guess, of the availability side that I spoke about earlier as a character trait. I've moved 7 different times in my professional career in order to, you know, capitalize on opportunity. And this was very unique, and it was worth, you know, leaving the state of Oklahoma, where certainly have roots and family and tradition. But the great thing about it is, you know, there's planes that get us everywhere, you know, and able to travel and stuff. And so technology makes it a little bit easier to stay connected.
Well, Chance, I really appreciate you coming on, and I want to reach out to you and ask you to come on. I appreciate you taking the opportunity, and you and I getting to spend some time together, and I'm appreciative.
Well, I really do thank you for having me and considering me a worthy guest. And, I hope that your audience that's listening continues to grow. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk about some of these things that, in life that carry over from the sport, carry over into entrepreneur opportunities. One of the things that I'm doing is making a documentary film about my hometown. It's called The Price of Legacy. And I got to tell you, if it weren't for the things that I learned in wrestling, trying to take this on and doing a full-time career and raising a family and, making a movie at the same time that's worthy of watching and representative of my hometown is a challenging thing to do. But at the end of the day, it's still availability, affability, accountability, and attention to detail that drive it all.
Well, before we get off, tell us where we can, what's the link, or where can we go find that, the movie?
Yeah, well, right now we haven't released it yet. We hope to release right before the start of the season in October of this year. So we're in the editing process now.
Okay.
And so we're going through and pulling footage together and interviews together. And, we really want to make this a sport, not just about, my hometown of Perry, Oklahoma and their wrestling program, but, this really correlates to all wrestling programs across the country where you have, the right number of people involved, the right support from the community, the right coaching, and the kids that go through the process. We want to show what the sport of wrestling can do and what it produces in people. And so you'll get to see that through the trials and tribulations of, a particular season when that streak that I told you about was on the line for the Perry Wrestling program. And you'll get to see what everybody went through and when we release it. But you can follow us now on all the social media sites on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Price of Legacy.
Price of Legacy. Cool. All right. Well, Chance,
yeah.
I'll let you run. I appreciate you coming on, and thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Josh. It was a privilege.
All right. You have a good day.
You too.